Good afternoon, everybody. I put on the microphone, although it's a bit of a small room.
Yeah.
If the microphone gets annoying, just raise your hand as if you were asking a question and say, hey, the microphone's kind of annoying, you don't need it, and I will turn it off. Is that a deal?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. So, let me quick introduce myself. Why am I standing up here? My name is Sam Clemens. I'm founder and head of product at a growth stage company called Insight Squared. We're about 150 people. This is the 5th time I've done this. Before this, I ran product at another company called HubSpot. Before that was 3 other companies, and I had an assortment of other stuff. I'm a venture partner at a company called Accomplice in town, and I also teach product management at Harvard Business School and MIT Sloan. So let me get a quick sense of who I'm speaking to. This is a growth stage conference. Tell me, I want to get a sense for what stage people's companies are at. Raise your hand if you're like very early stage, say, for example, seed or Series A. Okay. Raise your hand if you're more mid-growth stage, for example, Series B through not IPO yet. Okay, raise your hand if you're just short of IPO or post-IPO companies, larger companies. Okay, good. So a bit of an even distribution. Also, companies, I tend to simplify things into thinking, all right, most companies will tend to build things in some way or another and then sell things in one way or another. How many people do we have on the build side of the house? Okay, on the sell side of the house? Okay, good, even distribution. All right, so this being a growth conference, there's a problem that I frequently see time and time again at growth stage companies on the build side of the house, where there's this disconnect between what the company's objectives are, usually voiced by the CEO or other executives, and the way that the product or the build team is executing. Okay, and you have this gap. And what's interesting is it doesn't happen at the very early stage. At the very early stage, at the super small company size, really what you're focused on is product market fit. And the team is small enough that there's really not a lot of communication gaps. You're all sitting next to each other. And what happens is as the company grows, you start sitting farther apart with one person running sales, another running engineering or product or marketing. The distance increases, the complexity increases. Also, the things that the company is doing, the executives start looking a little bit further afield. So oftentimes is the build side, particularly if they're a software company running agile, okay? They tend to be focused in a very iterative, short-term cycle that's optimized for flexibility. And so what you get are a set of problems that often look like this. For example, you have the CEO who's thinking about, they're looking way ahead. They're looking, maybe not even way ahead, 4 quarters ahead. You then have the product team who basically has their head down, and they're doing 1 week or 2 week sprints, okay? And so they're not really thinking about what are we going to be building or delivering in 4 quarters. And so you have this CEO, or maybe even this is the VP of marketing, saying, hey, I've got a user conference coming up in 3 quarters, and I need to be able to know roughly what new thing, what new feature I'm going to be demoing, okay? Because we need to start making collateral and signs and that kind of thing. But meanwhile, the agile product team is thinking about what exact features are we building in the next 2 weeks, and they're not really designed to give an answer to this constituency. How many people have seen this kind of a gap before in their company? Oh, good, okay. All right, let's do another one. Sometimes you have management team meetings. Tell me if this looks familiar. The sales team is saying, we're about to bring in our largest customer ever, and we need feature X. Maybe not right now, but you at least need to tell me that we're going to be able to get them feature X in the 1st quarter of this annual contract, and then they'll be fine. Meanwhile, you have the services team, okay? They have a renewal metric on their head, or a customer sat metric on their head, and they say, 40% of our customers are all asking for this one thing. The thing we should be building is feature Y instead, okay? And then you have the product team who's stuck in the middle. And they're saying, okay, let's have a logical discussion about this, and then they're taking a punch in the face, and things are no longer fun. How many people have been in management team discussions where the prioritization looks somewhat similar to this? Oh, excellent, good, this is gonna be good. All right, I got one more. Oh my God. All right. Sometimes you have, let's look at the front line. You've got people right in the customer services organization. They're taking emails and phone calls with customers in pain. Okay, it could be a bug, it could be a feature, and the customer's like, how could you not have this? And so the services team, they're getting on the horn, they're saying, hey, when are we going to get feature X? And meanwhile, your Agile product team is saying, we run Agile. I'll tell you we're not doing it in the next 2 weeks, but after that, we're not, we run Agile. And that just really pisses off the front line. Okay? How many people have seen a situation like this before? Okay, if I didn't get you with one of these, then I'm sorry, but I think I got most of the crowd. All right, so the good news is that there's a relatively straightforward technique, process, tool, whatever you want to call it, that growth stage companies use to solve this problem of a short-term flexibility-oriented build side and a management executive structure that's increasingly looking for, we're not even talking about like 5, 10-year goals, even just like 1 or 2 year goals, okay? What I'm going to describe is, it's a tool, okay? There's many different ways to do this. I'm not going to focus on the pixels or the colors or any of the details, what software package you can use to run. I'm not going to talk about that. What I'm going to talk about is the pattern amongst companies that do this well and successfully. There's a certain set of characteristics that those companies have when doing this. That if you don't generally do these small set of characteristics, generally it doesn't work and it often leads to tears and pain and death. So I'm just going to describe the high level stuff. I'm not going to go into the small details. Is that fair? Okay. All right. The process is called product roadmap. This is an example of a roadmap, and to protect the innocent, I'm going to gray out some of the stuff. This is actually our roadmap from May of 2016. All right, so I'm going to talk about some of these salient characteristics that are common characteristics among however you do it, whatever software package, whatever the colors are, the teams, the size, doesn't matter. Okay, so let's talk about some of these basic characteristics. The first is timing. Companies have a metabolism, okay? And just like us, the metabolism changes over time. When I was a kid, I used to eat candy bars. Now I have to eat more vegetables and things because your metabolism slows down over time. The same thing happens at startups. When you're a very early stage startup, your metabolism is hyper fast, okay? You could be running Agile, you're doing 1 week sprints, okay? Later on, you're a post-IPO company, you're thinking a lot more about quarterly earnings and releases. You might have a quarterly release structure. It also varies by industry, okay? Whether you're selling to other tech companies or whether you're selling to healthcare might affect your metabolism. So, metabolism matters in how you design your roadmap, okay? The first thing you notice is, what is the granularity of your timing? You're going to want to have roughly 3 or 4 buckets of things that you're road mapping stuff into. Some companies do it as short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Some companies do it as now, soon, and way off. Okay? If you want to get a little more specific about it, you could also do, for example, quarters. If you were far late stage, you could do years. But the idea is, up here where A is carefully pick your granularity. What you're looking for is, if you think about each one of the things in here, there's a certain amount of vibration or uncertainty that goes around exactly when that thing is going to deliver. And we'll talk about what that is in a second. What you don't want to do is have these buckets so narrow that the natural vibration of the electron is going to make it hopping outside of the bucket all the time and make the accuracy of your roadmap go to complete crap. At the same time, you don't want to have the buckets be so big that it's meaningless to a user. Yeah?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to know, this is riveting and exactly the problems you run into every day.
Yeah.
So I would like to not focus on taking notes and listening instead. Are you going to share this stuff, any of these things afterwards?
Yes. Yes, I can do that. Okay. So think about the granularity of your timing. For an engineering organization that's in the growth stage, I would typically think that quarter would be a good starting spot. Usually, an engineering team can figure out, roughly speaking, within a quarter, what quarter they're going to deliver. They can't tell you which week or which month, but they can land the rocket on a quarter, okay? And then you want to have not 7 buckets of this. You want to have roughly 4 because you don't want to overthink it. And then the last thing is, how often do you want to update this? Okay. What's interesting is the update frequency doesn't have to match the bucketing. This is an example of a quarterly bucketed roadmap that is updated monthly. Okay. The update frequency is going to correspond to roughly how often does your management team decide or potentially decide to change its strategy. Where you might want to move something from here up to here or here downwards based on competitive pressures, new knowledge about customers, whatever it might be. Okay? If that happens on a monthly cadence, you don't want to update your roadmap on a quarterly cadence, because then the roadmap will be under a lot of interim pressure in between. Okay? So the first thing to think about this is, what is your timing, what is the natural metabolism of your company? Questions on timing? All right. This is the actual most important thing. The uncertainty part. This is where most agile organizations get hung up. They say, philosophically, religiously, I am opposed to telling you what we're going to be building in 2 quarters, because we are customer driven, we focus exactly on what needs they're going to need then. And so I am not committing to anything 2 quarters from now, because I might just be lying to you. So rather than potentially lie to you, I'm just not going to tell you anything. There is a middle ground here. When the person is saying that religious objection, in their head, they actually do have a gut sense on what they're going to be building 2 quarters from now. Okay? It's just that there's a fear factor in committing to it. So how do you get over that? How do you actually draw out from their head their pretty good gut sense on what they're going to be building, but without causing them to be defensive, like that bunker picture we saw from Private Ryan? The way you do it is you explicitly call out the uncertainty in the roadmap. So a way of doing that is you explicitly label the buckets with a percentage. This is one way of doing it. Okay? In this roadmap, the percentage indicates what is the percent likelihood that nothing changes. Okay? If you're in May, there's an 80% chance that things in Q2 are not going to change. You're halfway through the quarter, 80% chance that when we finish Q2, the list of things we deliver looks exactly like that. Okay? But if you go out another 3 months, there's only a 60% chance that we won't have moved something. Okay? It's usually not because something pushes. It's usually because the management team has changed their mind. And then it decreases to where this is really it's like this. Okay? But it's still giving you a gut sense of what's on the horizon. These are the things that are potentially going to come in. And so while it's low certainty, it is still information that the team can use when they're thinking about what is coming up. Okay? So the second thing, but perhaps the most important thing that companies get hung up on, is you have to explicitly call out the uncertainty when you're designing a roadmap. Questions on this? Yeah?
How much of the uncertainty comes from those things that are further out, especially with agile teams? You haven't had your team even spec out what the effort is to do those things. So they have some loose idea, create product X, and they don't even know what product X is yet, so they have a very hard time getting any sense of what it's going to take to build it.
Excellent question. Thank you for being a straight man. The third thing that you look at are the actual items and some of those sizes next to them. Okay? So what are the things on here? One of the tricks is you need to stay out of the feature level discussions when you're having these roadmap things. And it's so easy to fall into it. Remember that picture, the boxing picture I did at the beginning? It's so easy for a head of sales to say, I want that feature right there. And a head of services to say, actually, I want this feature. Or it could be the front line, the services team saying, I want feature X, Y, Z. When you're doing road mapping, you need to not have those discussions. Okay? And this actually is where it fits well with an agile mentality. The things on here are, in agile you can call them epics. If you're not on the agile mindset, you could think of them as projects. They're not features, they're a level above that. Groups of, say, 10 features that are rolled together in a project. Okay? It might be an actual product for your company. Like, that is more or less a product for us. Okay? So it's a higher level of granularity. And this enables you to say, each of the things that appears on this roadmap is we are solving a known problem using that project. We're not going to have to decide right now, 3 quarters from now, the actual features that are part of it. We just know that we're going to address that problem. Okay? which means that makes the Agile teams happy because they're not committing to a specific feature, okay? And then roughly speaking, one of the tricks is you can put a t-shirt size next to it. Usually an engineering team will be like, look, we know roughly what that problem is. We don't know exactly what features we're going to use to fix it, but we roughly know, in comparison to other things, roughly how big that kind of a project is going to be. Is that going to be pretty easy to do, or is that going to be like, you know, invading a new Vietnam or something? So that's another trick, is to have a t-shirt size next to it. This also enables, just one second, this enables when you're having those discussions in the management team, and the head of sales says, I really want, pick one, I really want this. And what they don't want is this, okay? It enables you to have a more informed trade-off discussion because they're not trying to trade something that's extra small for an extra large project. Yeah.
Just a quick comment. What company I was working for, they use story points, things like that. And I'm like I want this bucketing, because I agree.
Yeah.
Because number one, I don't want to waste the developer's time estimating stuff further down the roadmap, which is how you get the story points. And number two, it just didn't make sense that it's too granular. That's not what we should be using as a metric.
Yeah, it's false precision to go to story points.
Right.
And also think about, this whole roadmap is how to avoid false precision, okay? You're trying to have an executive level discussion about roadmap. You should not be down in the weeds, okay? And one way to do that is to say, ground rules, no discussions about features. If you want the button to be green and to do something else, we can talk about that, but not in this discussion. Okay, other questions about granularity of the actual projects? Okay. All right. How do we actually communicate it? This is an email, but let me call out some of the salient points. When you go to communicate a roadmap, one of the most important things to do is to, actually before I do that, the distribution. This is perhaps why most companies, other than the Agile-centric build team objecting, the reason most teams back off from doing this is they think to themselves, what about the danger? Okay, how can this will make things too visible. Okay, so one of the things you want to think about is what is the right level of distribution for your company. Okay, some common options are, you could do it and just have it be used as a management team tool. Only the executives see it. One circle larger might be, you can do it and you can send it out to the whole company, meaning you can send it out to the sales team and the services team. Okay. Last time I mentioned this at a BPMA conference, I had like riots in the aisles. Oh my gosh, you're going to send a roadmap to the sales team. All hell will break loose. It depends how you do it. That's what this boxed thing at the top here says. I explicitly tell them, print this out, tape it to your desk. Use this to inform your conversations with customers. Okay? They're asking for something that's in the 80% bucket. By all means, tell them it's likely that, by the time they're onboarded, we're already going to have that feature for them. Okay? But I explicitly tell them, do not send this to customers. We've been doing this for 7 years and I haven't had leakage yet. Okay? Another one that some companies do is they actually send it out. They make it a public-facing roadmap. Okay? So companies like Intuit or Salesforce might do this. That can get quite dangerous. Okay? At that point, you often need to maybe have a separate dashboard altogether that is much vaguer, because for this one simple fact, customers don't know how to interpret that uncertainty axis that we had on there before. Okay? The sales team, you have some level of control. You can train them how to use this. They can change how they talk about different things. Customers aren't going to know what to do with that. They're going to treat everything on the roadmap as a commitment. So personally, I would not recommend, at least for the purposes of trying to solve the 3 problems you saw up front, I would not recommend sending it to customers.
Comment?
Yes.
Yeah. In the past, this has been very successfully used and sent to customers.
Yeah.
And the way you do that, you divide this into phases. Phase A, B, C, D, E, right?
Yeah.
And you say A is out here, B is coming next quarter, C is next year, D is further down the road.
Yeah.
So you are essentially training your customers to learn this language.
Yeah.
And they figure out over time that if it's a D or an E,
Yeah.
it ain't coming anytime soon.
Yeah.
And if it's an A, expect it to come. So you could communicate that to the customer.
Okay. I like that. That's a level of essentially best practice achievement. That, let's call that the high performing A student category. If done absolutely right, you should be able to send it to customers and package it such that they get the uncertainty. Maybe they get it from essentially the way the buckets expand in size. If you're doing this for the first time, I wouldn't jump into the deep end right away.
You also run into another danger with that, which is sales sometimes doesn't want that uncertainty to be known. They want to be able to control that conversation. So if there's something that is out there and the customers have been trained to know that that means it's never coming, then, or that it's not coming for a long time, that actually becomes a barrier for sales who might be trying to basically manage a situation differently. So even though you can train a customer base, it's highly dependent on your customer base, whether that's a smart plan.
Yes. So I think the takeaway on this would be there are multiple levers for this, this setting. If you're jumping in for the first time, I wouldn't choose the bottom one. Okay? I would choose the middle one. Yes.
Well, you could also find a way in the middle and say you share the roadmap only with your strategic accounts. A guided conversation.
Yes.
Right? And B, I also think there's an advantage sharing it with customers because it holds the engineering teams accountable. If you never share it to the outside world, who is going to hold you accountable?
So ideally, you want to hold the engineering teams accountable using the discussion of the management team. It shouldn't be necessary, in my opinion, to get customers in order to do that. Okay? I think the accountable thing is real. I think you can get there by doing this as well. All right, so let me keep going. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Remarkable as it may seem, there are times when you actually have a contractual obligation to share product roadmaps with certain classes of customers. And I think there you have an interesting challenge, because if you prepare an alternate dashboard, which you have to do because of the dangers that you already described, you have an additional challenge of training the frontline teams of how to reconcile what got published with these evolving views that are shared inside the company. And that can be quite tricky over times.
Yes. Yeah, I wouldn't do that unless you have to.
Like I said, contractual.
Yeah.
The risk that is happening frequently is basically the engineering team is leveraging the customers as a commitment because of this type of communication. So you end up in a commitment that is going through the engineering in order to stabilize the system, and then you are losing agility.
So you have your customers directly talking to engineering.
No. Through sales, through the entire structure, but then propagates, and then in a way you're getting commitment. So this is another type of risk that.
Yeah. So if that's happening, if it's coming through sales, essentially sales is they're strong arm. They're basically using the customers to say, hey, these customers say we need this thing by a certain time, and then they're using the commitments to those customers to basically lock it in. That's often the kind of behavior that I would want to make a more rational discussion-based purpose, kind of process, so that you allow other groups besides sales to also participate. For example, the services team or the marketing team, to at least have some discussion rather than sales just saying, hey, we locked it in, we have customers on it. If you allow that too much, you could essentially allow sales to dictate almost the entire roadmap.
Yeah, no, there are, what I was talking about is situations where sales, there is a strange alignment between sales and engineering, right? That the engineering is taking that as an opportunity in order to hook the certainty into a date.
Sales could say, we need this for a customer, and engineering wants to build it anyway. So they have a little alliance going. Yeah. That doesn't make it the right thing to build. Yeah. Yes.
Just quickly, I'm not sure if you'll talk about this, but I like in your note, you're not just talking about the what are we doing, which is the roadmap, but you're framing the why and then the how.
Another straight man.
There's been a lot of success. You can always fall back to those principles when there's arguments about features.
Yes.
And I like the framework.
Yes. Okay, another salient characteristic of when you communicate this roadmap is tie it to the vision, okay? You have, the whole reason we're having this discussion is because you have company level objectives and you're trying to figure out how to match the build side execution with those company objectives. So you did the hard work of actually coming up with a roadmap. When you communicate it, make explicit that tie, okay? Talk about the company level objectives and how they trace down to the things in the roadmap, okay? Sometimes this might be OKRs, SGIs, It could just be simple company goals, whatever it might be. Go from the company level objectives down to the themes that are present in that roadmap, okay? And then lastly, talk about the actual changes in the roadmap. And here's the key, tell why. So often, the thing that bothers, let's say, the customer services rep, it's not that they're not getting their feature. It's that they don't know why they're not getting it, okay? When they don't get it, oftentimes they'll come to you and they'll say, why are we not working on this? How can we not be working on this? You must be bad at prioritization. And then you describe to them the other 4 things that are in front. And at that point, they're like, oh yeah, actually, no, those are good things. Oh, okay, I get it now, okay? It's the why that is often lacking from the communication, okay? So one of the biggest things you can do with your communication of the roadmap when you send it out is to tell why things are moving. Okay, one last bit. You've made the roadmap, you've communicated it, and now one of the fun things you can do is throw some analysis on top and do, for example, a quarterly discussion where you do things about where is the effort going. You can do a column charts, segmented. You can do area charts. You can have a lot of fun with this. But basically, this is an enabled thing that you can do when you have a roadmap process. Okay? You can then go and analyze it and talk about it essentially at a higher level when you're not caught in that boxing fight between teams. All right. That's all I had. Let's do Q&A. Yeah.
So I love this presentation. It describes perfectly a great mechanical process for getting the roadmap instantiated, visualized, and revised. And I love it. You know, I'm going to bring it back to
I'm
my
sensing
team.
a but.
And there is a but, right? Every time I try to have a rational discussion with the rest of the team, I face an objection of the kind, well, but how do we know that this is really important to the business? Can you show me the dollar value attached to this particular item? And no amount of market analysis, no amount of prognosticating over the sales pipeline can really give me the insight saying, if we build this feature, that's $2 million. And if we do this kind of stuff, it's going to be like $1 million now, but then in services, we're going to get 3 later.
Yeah.
So the most important challenge for me when it comes to building a roadmap comes from having that discussion. This is more important than that. Here's how we show.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight to share in that area?
I do. Oftentimes, this is common, by the way, you will get engineering teams that say, I want to know how many dollars this feature is going to make us. And really what they're saying is, I don't have confidence in your prioritization. And it's being expressed as, show me the numbers, okay? There's really 2 ways to counteract that. And you have to be a bit of a psychiatrist here. You have to go beyond what they're saying to what the really the dissatisfaction.
That's my boss, by the way. It's not I'm engineering. My boss says, like, show me the numbers.
So there's really 2 things you need to do. One is you need to be able to express at a high level what are the company level objectives, okay? In a way that the whole team understands. So it might be, we're trying to achieve 80% bookings growth next year. We're trying to increase our login frequency by 40% from X to Y. We're trying to increase our renewal rate. We're trying to get a new product to 100 customers. Whatever it might be. You often have these company level objectives. And underneath them are many things. The services team could be doing something different. Okay? The product team could be doing something different. Every team could be doing something different. So there's efforts in each. So step 1 is visibility of even the engineers understanding at a top level, what are we trying to do? Okay? But what's important is it's not just make more money. It's not just go sell $2 million, another $100,000 worth of software. It could also be we're trying to increase the engagement rate. There's many reasons why we build things. So one is actually laying out those objectives. And then the second is you need to find a way to connect those objectives down to their level. You don't always need to go down to this feature gives X dollars of benefit as long as you get close. Because remember, their root angst is, I don't believe your prioritization. It's because there's the air gap. okay? You don't need to go down to the ground level. You just need to get within a foot of the ground. And then their core angst, which they're so poorly expressing, will actually be solved. So you need to start at those company level objectives and then roadmap your way down. Here are the objectives, and that's driving the following 3 core themes in our roadmap, each of which has a set of projects, okay? And they can look at those, the top level objectives, and they can say, yeah, that actually foots. If we're trying to increase our engagement, yes, there are a set of 4 projects we can do. We can do X, Y, Z, and something else, which will do that. And then they're willing to say to themselves, okay, we don't need to decide the exact features underneath that, because usually in engineering they have the agile mindset. We don't need to know the features, but we understand that we are behind doing that project. Or they might say, hey, look, I don't think that project will help the top level goal, but at least then it's a constructive discussion. Does that make sense? Does that help? Okay. I hear that a lot. Also, your PMs need to be good. Okay? When you actually go from the project down to the feature level, if you're picking the wrong features, you could also get that pushback from the engineering team. So basically, at every step, objectives to the projects down to features, each one of those needs to be, it needs to hold water. Yes?
So I'm hearing, it relates to that question actually. You're linking those features in your roadmap to company objectives. But to get...
Sorry, let me correct because it's important. There are no features on the roadmap.
Okay. Yeah.
Higher level projects.
Sure.
Okay.
Whatever we're calling them today.
Yeah.
But in between, to get to that roadmap, do you have a list of 50 prioritized items that kind of go down in the scale so you can tell, well, we should deliver this quarter and this quarter because everything is prioritized? And do you try and build up a framework around that to get to that point?
Yeah. Let's look at that. Okay.
Yeah.
The tool I use for this is extremely sophisticated. It's Google Sheets, and I print a PDF. These are columns in the sheet. Each of them corresponds to an engineering team and a product manager. Underneath this, not printed, is the longer someday column, and then below that is a junk drawer section of the column. So there is indeed a long list of things that get prioritized. It's the PM's responsibility. Once a month, they stand up and they basically describe or argue in front of the other PMs why they're shifting things around, okay? Why they might move something up from here, why they might move this up and this down, okay? So essentially, there is a longer list of things that is getting prioritized. It's done by the PM because I'm lazy, I don't want to do it. I make them prioritize their column, and my job is to prioritize across the columns. Yes?
I might suggest a couple of you and I think very similarly about this, but maybe one, we do 2 things. One is a simplicity rule. Like you can't have 400 things on the list. It's just stupid. So like this idea of like every business unit gets 5 business objective priorities, and you can only have 5 product priorities underneath that. So we just call it a 5x5. And nobody can ever have a list without a rank order of priority, not delivery time. Because there's 2 different things there, right? This is the most important thing. It may be delivered agilely in 5 releases before we get it done, versus saying, oh, gee, this one's the first thing we're getting out because it's a small thing that anybody can knock out. So that rank order discipline changes that conversation from why are we doing this to, well, what would you rather do? Like, which thing is wrong on the rank order, which is a really critical discussion.
Other questions? Yes?
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the disconnect. We're small enough that I'm both the CTO and really the product manager because we don't really have a product manager yet. So,
yeah.
However, what I find is I am always grappling with the rest of the senior management team to say, you can't do it all. I've got a team of 5 developers and a couple of outside folks. So that's going to limit what we can do while maintaining compliance on the rest of the system and such like that. So I do try to force them into they give me a benefit, I give them a feasibility, and we put those kind of in a ratio and try to pick them off from there. But if they can't articulate the benefit to me in some sort of number, I push on them very hard to do something like that.
Yeah.
In fact, I say it has some I don't need them to prove it to me. I don't need to see customer surveys. I just want them to think of a number like that.
Yeah. So essentially what you can do is you can run a simplified version of this where you have one column.
Right.
And you have the t-shirt sizes next to the project. Having the t-shirt sizes forces them to think, and you can spread out your projects according to when you actually think you can deliver them what quarter. The t-shirt sizes forces them to make fair trade-offs. When sales wants to act something that services wants and flip it around, you can make sure that you're actually, maybe moving 2 down and only getting 1 up. I also find that it allows the management team discussions to be a little bit more rational and impartial, a little bit more structured, which in management team meetings that can get a little emotional. It's sometimes useful. Yes?
Maybe it's related to what we are doing, but one of the problems of staying at the project level instead of going into detail, when you have complicated projects like in analytics that include also R&D in them.
Yeah.
So the need to go into details is in order to have a reasonable uncertainty in terms of delivery is making it very, very complicated.
Yeah.
So that, or another way of saying it, the time bucket that you need in order to have decent uncertainties, okay, in this type of projects, is way too long compared to the time you need with respect to the market.
Got it. So one of the interesting things is that I don't allow, this last column here, SRE, is Systems and Reliability. It's a term that we decided on for that team. This is actually like a pretty low-level team. These are not customer-facing features that are going out. These ones, this is our data processing layer. This is not customer-facing features either, okay? I still make the non-customer-facing engineering teams roadmap out, basically go through the exercise of, you want to do read-only failover to have hot swaps and all this other stuff. You need to go through the exercise. Just because you're not customer-facing doesn't give you a pass. You still need to go through the exercise of thinking it out. I find that engineering teams in general, when they, particularly if they don't have a PM, they can often get away with not doing the advanced thinking of how long would it take us to do read-only failover. And the excuse they will often give is, oh, well, do you want us to go estimate the 17 stories? Like, that's not cool, because we're doing it 3 quarters from now. And the response is, no, I'm not asking you to do going down to the story level. Just like I don't ask the people over here to do it. But fair is fair. If you actually put in the effort, stop dodging the question. If you actually put in the effort, you can roughly tell me how long it's going to take to do read-only failover relative to another project. And usually they look kind of sheepish and they're like, yeah, you know what, you're right. I can't tell you in absolute terms, but roughly speaking, I know that this is roughly about the same size as when we did that project up there. Is that fair? And then you said the longer projects. Whenever we get something too big, we just break it up. If it's going to take 3 quarters to build, I'd rather break it up into pieces and deliver it incrementally, even if some of the pieces are, there's a back-end piece which will be live but not visible. Make sense? Yeah.
What technique are you suggesting that you would use here to make sure that you're not overplanning your capacity for any given quarter, for example? So I totally understand not getting down to the story point level because it's fake precision, but how are you also ensuring that, for example, 3 medium-sized projects and 2 smalls is not too much work for a team in quarter 2?
Overtime accuracy and shame and embarrassment. Basically the PMs, this is the, 60th of this every month for 7 years.
Sure.
And it's trackable. It's on our wiki and it's in a folder that everyone has access to. It's just a long list of files. When a PM doesn't hit it, there's a certain amount of like, yeah, you screwed up. Okay? If it was in the 80% bucket and we didn't hit it because it pushed, rather than us changing our mind about something at the last second, there's a certain amount of, hey PM, you kind of screwed up. It's not an engineering thing. Okay? The engineering side is relatively concrete in how the story points all pan out and they do their commitments. Okay? But it's the PM really. So I kind of look at my PMs and say, hey, when you're a new PM, maybe you just took over the team. there's a certain amount of, you screwed up and you missed the quarter. Okay, one of your things had to push. That's fine. Second quarter, okay. Don't do it on the third quarter. You're going to look bad. And so I actually hold them to higher percentages than what's on here. The Q2, you should be hitting that 95%. It's like sales. I like to under-promise, over-deliver. Make sense? Yeah.
Sorry, I came in a little bit late, so I'm not sure if you talked about that, but how do you handle prioritization when you have different teams sort of depending on each other?
Yeah. This is fantastic for getting inter-team dependencies sorted out, okay? This is our data processing team, for example. These are two front-end product teams. Everything in this column is here because one of these teams needs it as a precursor, okay? If you don't have something like a roadmap, often this is done in like ad hoc conversations, okay? Calling this out is perfect because then what happens is one of these teams moves things around. They bump a project up. Suddenly the PM who runs this team is like, oh shit, you just bumped that up. I need to bump my thing up. And if I bump up the precursor for it, something else has to go down for the other team, okay? So it's basically making explicit the dependencies which are so often inferred or not official or not visible. Yeah?
But in follow-up to that, like, who's saying that person should be pushing it? Like, what if
this is the discussion in that road mapping session that I have with my PMs every month. One of them is going to bump up a project, and that means that the dependency has to come up as well, and that someone else's dependency goes down. That other product's like, hey, what the heck? You're going to move my dependency down. That means I can't ship my thing in time. So then we have a visibility into which of the two front-facing projects do we want to have move up. And maybe it means that the first PM that wanted their thing bumped up doesn't get it. But at least the discussion's happening. It's an explicit conversation, as opposed to them doing it and then the team in the middle having to deliver two things for each of their customer teams, for each of their dependent teams in the back.
Can you talk a little bit more about those roles, maybe a little more insight into the PM role? So in other worlds, the product manager can't do that swap out or even presume that they know enough about it might be Jane is the engineer working on that, and Jane has to do both of those things. You can't swap it as easily as something else that could be across the rest of the team. And do you actually have the engineering leaders in that monthly meeting swapping things off, or is it just the PMs that decide?
There are engineering leaders in here because sometimes this will be essentially the effective PM for a deep systems team will be an engineering leader. And the head of engineering is in the roadmap session as well. But I don't have all of the engineering leads in there just because that would make it a very large meeting. And it's a little awkward when the PMs are really going at it. So oftentimes the PMs generally know the engineering dependencies. Oh, one more thing. When we have the roadmap session and we decide on this, it's a draft. I then give us a few days. The PMs will go shop it with their engineering lead to make sure that if something moved, all the dependencies are still there. I go shop it with the management team, and I often get input from the CEO. This comes up, we really need to move this thing around. So there's a grace period in between to make sure that all of the moving pieces are tight before I hit send on the email out to the entire team on Sunday night. Yes?
So it's related to that. Whenever you move anything, there's an engineering cost to the move itself, because there's probably kind of people building up expertise around something that you're trying to do, and then they're going to drop off that and go to something else. So there's some lag you get just by moving something. So I'm really interested in those monthly sessions. On average, how many items would you have move? One,
very good question.
Or 5 or
the PMs are aware of that cost generally.
Yeah.
Because they've worked with that team over time.
Yeah.
I'd say you're going to move 1 or 2. Okay. So, and generally speaking, you're moving them from the 1 or 2 in a column.
Oh, okay. So you actually have like maybe 8 move every month.
Sure. And generally speaking, they're far enough out. The things more likely to move are in these buckets here.
Yeah.
And those also, by the way, they're far enough out that they're less likely to incur the movement cost, the switching cost.
Sure.
PMs know that if you're moving something out of here into here, they're going to get brutalized on the cost.
Yeah.
And so they're less likely to do it. because then they're not going to hit their commitments to me and the rest of the company. Yes?
So a number of times you've alluded to the fact that you have to have good PMs.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like reduced to a previously unsolved problem.
Let me qualify. Well, they all suck. So you're just looking for.
So what's your trick to getting good ones? Or how do you grow them?
Growing them is what I want to know.
It used to be I wouldn't hire a PM I'd already worked with. So I only grew them. And that was up through about 6 years ago. I would only grow them because I didn't like having to tear down the mental. I didn't have to like having to tear it down to rebuild it. Okay. In the last 6 years, I think that's changed. Essentially, what's happened is you've had a new crop of companies that have come up since Agile became more of the norm, and so these PMs were basically brought up in the Agile mindset as opposed to the waterfall. I'm going to write a 14-page Word doc as a spec type of mindset. That's usually what I have to break down. And so essentially, they were brought up in the new generation. And so I don't have to break it down and build it up again. And so I've been more satisfied in recent years, basically hiring people. You can kind of look at it's cohorting essentially. Look at what generation of PM where they started learning, and that'll kind of tell you whether or not they're what you're getting. Yeah. Yes.
What are your thoughts on the pragmatic model?
Pragmatic. I need another noun after that because there's at least three sort of religions.
Pragmatic marketing model.
I think that's the one that's decently waterfall. Is that correct? Do you write PRDs?
No.
No.
I mean, it works for Agile as well.
Okay. I guess I don't know enough about it then to have a constructive discussion. Okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
In the back.
How technical do PMs actually have to be, especially, I mean, does it depend on the company itself or the product that they're working on?
Yeah. Okay. Enough to run this, you don't need to be technical.
Okay.
You need to have a gut sense. You need to be familiar enough to know that if you're moving something around, what the dependency might be. But presumably you're working with an engineering lead. So this doesn't require any special technical knowledge. A separate question is, in sort of the new generation of software production, two things are happening. General PMs are getting more and more tech savvy. It's more common to have anyone in software be dabbling on the side in code. It could be a salesperson. I know salespeople are taking coding courses on the side. And so the level of familiarity that people have with code is getting higher. Also, the level of tools in which you're building engineering, when you're building software, it's more and more possible that you could have a continuous deployment environment where you actually let PMs, for example, change their own headlines and tooltips. So it's actually gotten to a point where, from my hiring, I only hire designers that write their own code, HTML and CSS, and I only hire PMs that can edit code. I don't make them write from scratch, but edit code. If we have a screen, I want you to be able to go in and change the headline yourself without bothering an engineer. That I want to make very clear. I'm an outlier in this. That level of technical knowledge is not required for this kind of thing. I'm getting the stop flag. I hope this was useful. Thank you very much.